everybody, welcome back to another edition of PD and P-Dubs Unscripted. Once again, I'm joined by our praise team director here, Joe Latusik.
Hey guys, happy to be filling in for P-Dubs today. Sorry, no P-Dubs. I know he's more exciting than me.
Oh, it's all good, and we've just had some technical issues where I was missing a chord. We were missing a chord that we used for the night of worship, and I wasn't sure how to quite figure it out, but I was looking around today, and then Joe had the chord actually, so we didn't have to get that one back for now.
It's funny how God works in these little ways, because yesterday I just felt compelled to go through this drawer I haven't gone through in a while, and I found this cable I've needed for a while, and I knew I had at some point, but it just kind of ninja vanished. So as I was going through it in the drawer, I was like, oh, here it is. I'll put it in my backpack because I need it for this mic. And then as soon as you showed me the thing and the two ports, I was like, I think I have that exact one. So
yeah, because I'm like, I don't have this type of USB cord, and like
God's timing is so funny. Apparently, he wanted us to do a podcast today.
Yeah, because it's been a few weeks. Because I think you were second to the last one we did. Because I recorded with you. Then later that day, recorded with Meshach.
Yeah.
So we had the one with you, and then we had the Meshach episode.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And so we haven't recorded. Like Pastor and I a week or two ago, we're like, okay, let's go record. We had a topic. We came down here. I was like, I can't get the right sound because we're missing the mixer. So I was like, it's going to sound underwater, and I don't want to have this podcast that has poor sound quality when we have such.
Sounds like everyone's talking.
Yeah. So since we have a good standard of what it sounds like, I'm like, I can't jeopardize, because we've done a few like that. I'm like, and I just don't like those.
It's hard to listen to, especially when you're used to the clarity of like a decent mic.
Yeah.
It's funny because this is actually a pretty good segue into our topic today, which is like tech and ministry, right?
Right.
There's like this growing demand for technology inside of churches, small and large, and so. Right. Particularly for our small little humble Lutheran church, it's a challenge trying to keep up with the rapid change of technology.
Right, but I mean, I feel at times we've been really good because before you came on staff, like during COVID, we didn't really miss a beat when it came to live stream because we were already live streaming our services.
That's huge.
Before COVID.
Yes.
So for us, it wasn't that hard. Like, it was time consuming, especially for Andy, who did all the editing, where we would record all the video services in advance. Like, we'd kind of do like 2 weekends of worth at a time.
Yeah.
And then he would go edit them, and then we'd put them up on.
I hear the stories of the days of COVID and even leading up to COVID, just like the changes in tech. And so thank God for our volunteers and our wonderful AV team, and especially Dave and Andy. Those guys, they make it happen, man. The BBBQ, the night of worship, like the tech bench, the way it's set up, like those guys are the masterminds behind it, you know?
Right. And like I said, so that, because like when we were recording for COVID, it was usually Jenny, Pastor Warren, myself, Dave, and Andy, and we were just being in the sanctuary by ourselves, and they set up a couple cameras on the floor.
How was that as like an era? Was that a kind of a special but also strange era?
It was kind of weird because it's weird like preaching to nobody.
And like not having that feedback of people.
Just like, so like I said, like we just would record one service for the weekend. Yeah. And I think, if I remember correctly, like for the 8 and 5:30, we'd probably bring in old music from previous recorded services and play them in there. But then we'd use videos from like the praise team and interject them in when there should be music normally.
That's cool.
But like the recording, because it was just like, okay, now we're just sitting here, like Pastor's doing his thing, I'm just sitting in the pew.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, now switch it around. And I think we maybe even had like a change of shirt, so it didn't look like we were wearing the same thing.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And that even like was crazy because like, and maybe we've talked about it on here, where like the children's messages, like we were doing all this stuff, and it's like, I told Pastor one day, I was like, man, I'm a little stressed out because I'm like, how are we going to outdo last week's children's messages? Because there was one where Andy had his drone, so he used his drone to bring us something.
Oh, how do you top that? Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's what got the puppets going.
Yes.
And then we had the puppets for quite a while after that.
Yeah. So,
like, it was all those little things of trying. Yeah. And, like, it was kind of neat, like, you talk about the strangeness, that idea of, like, okay, I was at my home watching the live streams when we were doing them during the normal worship times. But I was able to interact with the congregation or people on the chat because you had a little more engagement of people chatting there on the server.
That's cool.
And so, I mean, Pastor does a better job than I do, but we try to kind of get on there like during the services. But it's also hard because you're trying to think what's coming up next. What do I got to do?
Yeah.
But during that era, it was easy, like, I'm just watching and worshiping with everybody else. I can make a comment as we're doing that.
And that's part of the wonderful gift of technology, as much as there can be like challenges associated with it, especially with a small crew like ours. Like even the drone thing you mentioned, like 20 years ago, you would have needed to like rent a helicopter for a shot like that.
Right.
And so like the technology's now been put into our hands where, for a few $100, you can have a decent drone and 1080p, high resolution film and get really cinematic looking shots. And like you were saying, like even just the next week, you're like, how do we top that? And that's one of the challenges or the, potential downsides of technology is because it's so accessible now. Right. And now you don't even need to know how to like color grade or edit. You can just have an AI app do it for you. And you can have like cinematography level like footage and not have any real skills or know how to do it.
Well, you look at like on iPhones, and I'm sure like Droids do it too. I just don't know what they call it, but is it the cinematic videos where it blurs the background?
Sure, yeah.
You just see the people in high def, but the background's a little blurred.
It's amazing how much like those little things can cue to us, like, oh, this is a higher level production quality. Well, and you mentioned it at the top of the podcast here is like just these mics, like. Having high, audio quality is a big component, and so keeping all these things in mind while keeping Christ at the center of the message, like it's a challenge a lot of churches are facing, and so it's interesting. Like the deeper we get into this, just walking that tightrope of like, you want to do the best to make things look their best, partly for the sake of God and the kingdom, right? It's like, well, what is in terms of quality, what is God deserving of? Well, like the best of the best, right? So you want to make your best effort, but then also balancing that with like, you don't want tech to get in front of the mission. You don't want the method to be elevated above the mission, right?
It's a tool to use.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, I think this was probably during the COVID times as well, where we brought in that Google Voice number where people could text in the prayers.
Oh, that's cool.
So like, and I mean, we get a handful of those a weekend of people texting into those, and it's typically right during the prayer time.
I've heard you mention that you're able to check it live, and that's really cool.
So that's really nice, and I think that was like a COVID time kind of during that time. I think it was because it was like, okay, this could keep people connected with us. We could put it on the live streams for the worship. And it's not putting out Pastor my personal cell phone numbers for the whole world to find easily. Yeah. And it's just a Google Voice number. And
looking back on it, I think that's one of the lessons of COVID is like the power of God. It's another great example of like taking something that was challenging and awful in a lot of ways and like the good that came out of it. Like how many people you were able to stay connected with and to still reach. And and even beyond COVID, like just the fact that we can live stream our services. So like if you're sick or in hospice or can't leave your home for any reason.
Or traveling for vacation.
Yeah, that's great. Like, we were just at Nationals this past weekend, and it's like, it's super nice to be able to just like, I can literally pull up my YouTube app and like check in on a sermon and see how you guys were this weekend.
Right. That's what I was doing when I was at Phoenix in February. I want to see my friend Pastor Dave and his preaching when he was filling in for us here. And so, there I was in my hotel room in Phoenix getting ready for the day, had the service on. Yeah. Then, had it off when I was on the shuttle to the airport. And then sitting on the airplane while on the tarmac, watching the service again, the 10:30 service.
And this ties in, again, to the tech thing in terms of, like, how much do you want to push and fight for quality? Because there's a specialness to being able to be in person, like, especially with, like, the music and preaching, like, there's something to be said for being in the room. And so part of the push to make really high quality content, even in your streaming, is the higher you can raise the production quality, the closer it is to being in the room, And so like, I know you're a big fan of music. It's amazing watching, especially now with what they can do with technology, the live audio capture of live concerts.
Right.
They can make it sound like studio. In fact, a lot of like the tracks that we use for Night of Worship were recorded live at concerts. And so like it's unusual to be able to have that high level of sound quality in a live setting, but we can do it today. And so yeah, to kind of tie this back to Immanuel, it's like we're continually asking the question of like, which one of those things do we want to pursue, and how much do we want to pull on that thread?
Right, because I know we got some other things, but even like kind of looking at like how things have grown, like this whole podcast idea. Yeah, this was something that Pastor and I had talked about for a year or two before we actually finally got the podcast out and running. Yeah, it was just one of those like, people. This is what people are doing these days. Like, I listen to a lot of podcasts, like, this morning when I went on my morning walk, I was listening to podcasts.
Yeah. It's huge. And I think in a lot of ways, podcasts have replaced sort of like people's desire for nighttime talk television, like us growing up as kids, like, the Johnny Carsons and stuff, right? Like, now that like that airtime is too precious for ad space, and so talk shows, you may have noticed, have really just become people like hawking the project that they're working on now. And so there's some talking, but it's so processed and soundbitey that it's not the same as someone sitting down for 30 minutes or 3 hours,
right? Because I
just
think
talking.
Of, like, you bring up Johnny Carson. I remember having like those videos as a kid, like the best of Johnny Carson, where he brought in like the people with the animals. Or I don't think,
and he's literally just talking to them,
right? I don't think that now, like Fallon and other them have like people bringing in their animals,
and when they do, it's part of an act or a script or a little gimmick. And like, listen, there's something topical to that. And so like, I'm not trying to just hate on that stuff, but I think there's a hunger for people to like just hear people converse in a normal way.
Like I think of the podcast I listen to, it just seems like a couple of guys being friends, because a lot of them are sports where it's just them talking.
It's like me and you, Pastor John, just a couple of guys being friends,
and it's just like letting people in on that conversation, where you feel like you're part of that group there, where you know 100%. Them. It's like, I could see me having these types of conversations with my friends.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's kind of, too, what we thought with the podcast. It gives people to get a little more insight of who we are, just like everyday life, so to speak, Pastor, myself.
Yeah, day-to-day stuff. And that's part of what I've been trying to do with our Instagram. So for those who don't know, I've been running our Instagram page for the past year and a half. And so that's been on my mind constantly. And just last week, I was experimenting with like actually updating on the story of Instagram of like what I was working on that day. Because it's like, as much as I can, I feel like when social media is at its best, at least how it relates to churches, is like it's like a digital window inside our doors, and like what we're up to.
Like is it how the spaghetti was made, or like looking how things are made?
Yeah, 100%, and just the day-to-dayness of stuff. And so for the past year, we've had stuff up there like clips of sermons and just kind of like using it also as a sounding board for things we have going on. But part of the initiative, over the last few months has been to start really developing our social media and really, give the best type of window into what we're doing every day. And so we've started a few series. If you guys haven't checked it out, we'll make sure, if it's possible, to put in the link in the description, like our social media stuff that we're on.
I could probably do a QR code for that.
Oh, cool.
And put that on the video.
Yeah, cool. And maybe we'll do it sometime in church too. Throw a QR code up there to get more people connected on our Instagram and Facebook. And I think Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube are the big three that we're on, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have Twitter, but that hasn't been really active.
Yeah, sure.
Or should I say it's X now? Because
it's X now, right? Yeah.
But everybody calls it Twitter.
Yeah. It'll always be, it's like the Willis Tower and the Sears Tower thing, or whatever
Comiskey,
it's called now.
Or whatever you want to call the White Sox play. Well, maybe I actually don't have them on my computer, but I know I have them on my phone. Probably I can pull up.
Sure.
My phone's over there recording.
Yeah.
So I can't.
Well, we'll make sure we link in the description, like the different social media stuff we're on, but especially on on Instagram. And I'd like to try and start generalizing this over our Facebook and YouTube too. We've been doing that a little bit with some of this stuff, but like Ask the Pastors, we started last year.
Right.
And so it's like what it sounds like. We ask the pastors questions. It can be biblical. It can be just how to apply
like
a Christian
living.
Yeah. And, ranging from everything, theological and biblical to just, everyday life type stuff, topical stuff,
Right. And Pastor and I don't know the question in advance, so you're getting our raw and honest answers right there.
Yeah.
Where sometimes you might see us kind of like thinking out loud and just kind of maybe rambling a little bit as we try to process and answer.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's something in that reaching that is, one, it's a good exercise, but two, it's like that's part of how you find gold. You sort of can, God will reveal stuff through your own words that maybe you didn't even know was lurking in your subconscious.
Well,
you surprise yourself with what you say sometimes.
Because I know, like, I saw the one you posted yesterday about like forgiveness, and I guess I said something about, both sides need to be authentic, and I think it was Jamie commented how she loved that, and I was like, I don't remember that. I'm like, I vaguely remember saying that.
Yeah. But she called me about that. She was like, I just think that's like a little golden nugget there. It's like that authenticity piece.
Yeah, that was me just kind of spitballing there, and it just came out that way.
Yeah. What a wonderful way that we can be used by God as sort of a mouthpiece for truth. And so Ask the Pastors is one of our series, and so I'd like to, right now it's just on Instagram, but I want to see if we can migrate that over to like YouTube Shorts, because this is talking about the challenge of technology. Part of what's challenging for me is like, phones can be horizontal, right? Like you would see like in a cinema, but everyone holds them like this.
Right.
So you may have noticed all social media videos are vertical, but on YouTube, like it's a lot of times it's watched on a browser, and people expect to turn their phones on YouTube. So so I don't have the technical know-how to be able to do do one video but have both formats. So I'm always shooting in either or.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a challenge because, like, for instance, Ask the Pastors and our new one, Tiny Table Talks, where pastors sit down, and it's kind of like a version of Ask the Pastors, but with some of our little kids here. So we shot some interviews with our kindergartners where they were able to just ask you whatever questions were on their mind. Right. Some of them surprisingly deep. Maybe you shouldn't be surprised. You know, kids are like, they're just little humans, you know. Right. But so sweet to see them do that. So anyways, Ask the Pastors and Tiny Table Talks are both filmed vertically. But like, for instance, our digital devotional is filmed horizontally because that's really designed more for YouTube.
Okay.
So anyways, it's a long way of saying, like, I'm not totally equipped with the technical skills to navigate this stuff.
Unless you have two different phones recording, one one landscape, one portrait.
See, my understanding is how the real pros do it is they're shooting with like a real DSLR camera at high resolution. And so they're able to, out of that horizontal image, take a vertical slice, and it still maintains enough of its resolution that it doesn't look grainy. For me, when I try to do that, it doesn't look great. So.
Right, and that's like, because you were talking about that, I think of like the pictures I take just like in everyday life when I'm using, like, I'm always the horizontal. I'm never, because I'm like, it just looks better when it's horizontal.
Yeah, 100%. You know,
but I'm like, but most people do it vertical.
And sometimes it drives you nuts because it's like, oh, this is not a time to be vertical.
Like when I've done videos for like the National Youth Gathering, and you have pictures that are vertical, some that are horizontal. Yeah, and I just flipped them in my head there. But I'm like, oh, it looks so bad. I just don't like in the video because like sometimes the whole screen is filled up with the picture. Yes. Other times you just see it. The vertical version. Yes.
It's been really bugging me with the digital devotional on Instagram because you've just got so much black space on either side and just this little strip. But so, watch the digital devotional on Instagram, but also go over to YouTube and watch it full screen.
And it's on Facebook as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, we're trying to kind of develop a way to coordinate all of these things to synchronize and work together.
I think right now, you and I and maybe Maggie has access to the Instagram.
Yeah.
And then I have access to the YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah.
And so then, so usually Joe will send them to me, then I'll put them up there. So that's why they might be maybe a little delay between the two.
Sure, yeah. So bear with us as we, continue to explore this and make it a more unified process. And so there's kind of two halves to this coin too. There's the tech we're talking about in service, which is like live streaming, the people that are there day of. So even just the congregation can look up at the projector and see
what's the kind of flow of worship.
Yeah, and so like even just a standard service now has so much more tech demand than it used to. So it's like there's the production side of Instagram and social media that we're kind of working on, and then there's our whole team that is volunteering on Saturdays and Sundays. And so that's something that I wanted to talk a little bit about too, is as we're like getting deeper and deeper into this technological era, we're looking to expand our AV team. And so this is also a little bit of a call to action for anyone in the congregation that is whether you're technologically inclined or not, frankly, to be honest, because I was framing this initially. I was like, well, if you have an inclination towards it, this might be great, which is true. But I also just want to leave space for the fact that, like, for instance, I'm not super tech savvy, but like God has called me in this era of my life to be serving the church in this way, and so I've tried to take it seriously. Like, it's incumbent upon me to develop myself this way. I feel called to it, and so if you feel in any way called that way. I just want to encourage those listening to really not worry about wherever you're at. If you have a desire to serve, you will learn, and we will help you. And so yeah.
And I think because I know we had John Pakel on here a year or so ago on the podcast to promote like sign up for AV help. But I think on there I even talked about where for me it was never something I really wanted to learn. For it, man, because I was like, the more I learn, the more I got to do.
The more you got to do,
And then COVID, it was like, okay, we're shorthanded, especially with chapel. So then
you're jumping in. So
I'm jumping in, and like learned it pretty quickly. And maybe I think probably have some little bit of tech skills. But I'm like, you look at the soundboard, you're like, oh, that's too confusing.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme, it's really just a few things you got to pay attention to. It's not like you're using every little. Yeah. Because there's a ton of stuff on there that I could probably learn how to do, but I'm like, I know how to do the basics to make a service happen.
Yeah.
No, easy worship, easy enough. It's kind of like PowerPoint. Controlling the camera. it's easy, but it's one of those, like, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Like, Google's comes in handy. I mean, I guess it'd be harder for, like, AV during worship.
Sure.
But you look at, like, the podcast where we've grown with this, where it just used to be audio.
Yeah.
Then we were using where it was, like, Pastor had his camera on his laptop, I had mine. It was just the two of our faces, which I would control. Now I'm using my phone over there. And I've learned how to now, like, sync the audio easier. So it's one of those, like, you learn different tricks along the way to make things easier.
Yeah, God will make it happen through time, man. And that's one of the ways we're growing with the AV team now is, like, we're streamlining and formalizing the training process more. So it's a little bit less of a baptism by fire, trial by fire kind of thing.
Right.
You know, and listen, some of that's necessary. Some of it is just, like, you're not going to learn how to advance slides with a singer without doing it. And so there is some amount of that on the AV team, but we're working really hard to just, like, build a really robust pipeline to bring new people in, make them feel comfortable, you know, make them feel like you're totally ready and capable by the time you get to your first service. So you spend some time shadowing people, you spend some time really getting used to stuff. And I will say, you had mentioned the soundboard. The soundboard is one of those things that gets a really bad rep because it's visually so daunting.
Right.
But each one of those faders just is a volume control. It's one of the reasons the board is so big is we have so many different channels that we can control the volume on, from the piano mics to the pastor's mics and everything in between, right? So it gets a bad rap, and listen, at the highest levels, you can do a lot with a soundboard.
Right.
But for the basics that we need and for what we're doing, like mixing the live stream, making sure the sound is okay in the room, you can learn how to do it, even if you're not tech savvy.
Well, it's kind of like, like we've talked about with, like, using Final Cut for making videos.
Yeah.
Like, I know how to do the basics on there. But there's a lot more that I could do to be more proficient in Final Cut, and I think you would say the same thing with something like Final Cut.
Yeah, like a lot of, like, what I'm able to do with video editing has been trial and error over the years, but a lot of it is just, like, maladaptive strategies compensating for the fact that I don't actually know how to do the real thing the real way, you know? And so, but part of it, it's the same thing with editing software like Final Cut, is there's this element of, like, it's visually daunting at first. You get up on the tech board and you're like, what is all this? Like, you get to the camera switching thing and it's like, there's a joystick and there's buttons and there's a monitor, and, like, you kind of almost feel like a pilot behind an aircraft, you know?
There's so much.
But I promise to those listening, if you're interested at all, don't let that be a concern. God and our team will lead you into being able to serve in this ministry, you know?
Right.
But yeah, there's a growing demand for it as the church relies on it more. And so, I just wanted to be a sounding board a little bit for that and start putting the word out and especially encouraging our young people in the congregation. Like, if you're interested in tech, this is a fun way to get involved. There's a lot of cool stuff that we're doing.
Right, and especially as we get the new lighting and AV in the sanctuary, there's going to be a lot more fun things to play with.
Yeah, 100%.
Which that stuff, I don't know if I want to learn that stuff, but who knows?
Yeah, there's something for everybody kind of thing, because I'm also very much of the mindset, like, there's a subset of musicians that are super into gear, and, like, that, and in some ways, like, their passion is more for the gear than for the music itself. Like, there's always that guy who's like, I've got 100 guitars, and I can tell you every year that they're from.
Fender Stratocaster.
Yeah. And so those gearhead guys, you got to love them, but that's sort of their thing. And I've always been the type who's like, I can't be on both sides of the instrument. Like, I can play it. I don't want to have a whole lot to do with figuring out how to fix them and stuff, you know?
You want the roadie kind of to come and help you out on that.
Yeah, 100%. And so, like, that has been a challenge for me coming into this position as worship leader, is I can feel my resistance to, like, I don't want to know, like, just let Andy handle it or let this person handle it. But you learn pretty quickly in my position, like, it's incumbent upon me to force myself to overcome my resistance to wanting to learn that stuff, because it's just the truth that in my position, having some know-how is super useful for everybody.
And it's just another kind of tool for your toolbox, kind of like me saying, like, I didn't want to know how to do all the AV for stuff here.
Yeah.
But now that I do it, I can fill in a pinch, or, like, hey, this isn't going on. Okay, let me try to troubleshoot.
Yeah, 100%.
And I mean, that's a lot of what any of this tech stuff is troubleshooting. Like, we were texting about recording today, and I was like, I don't have the cord. And then I was like, and also GarageBand's not working.
Yeah.
If GarageBand's not working, I can't record. And it just kept, like, it would pop up like it's loading and then just shut down.
Yeah,
and like, it closed unexpectedly. I was like, what's going on? So I was like, shut off my laptop, turn it back on, restart it. Doesn't work. I'm just like, okay, I guess I'll just uninstall GarageBand and reinstall it, and that did the trick.
And so like some of it is just like this willingness to have to tinker, and like I had a brief period a few years ago where I was like, I'm good with language. I'll be a computer programmer. I could like make good money doing that. And I quickly realized how much of that job is being able to like search out solutions. Like you spend a lot of time on message boards going like, hey, I've run into this problem. What's your solution? And like, if you're unwilling to do that kind of digging, which I was, I found that I couldn't do that as a full-time job. But in terms of like troubleshooting this stuff in the moment, like, there's a handful of things we do. It's not computer programming, I promise.
Right.
And so you learn pretty quickly, like how to troubleshoot that stuff.
And sometimes it is that simple. Just restart everything.
It's amazing how much all these years later, because it was like, you bang on the TV, you turn it off, you turn it back on. It's amazing how much of that still is the case. Like I had a light go out on my TV in our basement, and one of the suggestions online was like, well, sometimes the connections get loose, so like go bang on the TV. And I banged on the TV, and the corner came back on.
Well, see, that's just reminded me of like my playing NES back in the day, the original Nintendo system.
Yeah,
hitting it, and blowing in the cartridge to try to get this thing to work.
Yeah,
and then it's like,
100%.
And it's like, hit this stupid thing to get it to try to work.
Yeah, man. There's a certain amount of that analog, problem solving that will always be a part of it. Right.
Kids these days won't get the joy of like hitting their system or blowing into the 100%. Cartridge.
It's weird with like everything going digital too. Like, this is part of the bridge I'm trying to straddle here. And it's weird in music. It's very much this case too, right? Is like we have physical instruments, but increasingly we can digitize how we export that sound or how we create that sound. And so, yeah.
Well, that's like, I can't remember if you've been in conversations with Pastor, I've talked about it, but like going to funerals for people that have served in the military.
You mentioned this to me about the trumpet?
Yeah, where you don't have as many trumpeters playing taps.
Yeah.
They just hold up a trumpet, and in the horn part of the trumpet, they have a little speaker, and they just hit a button, and it's just a recording of taps. I'm like, that just kind of...
That's wild. That's
wild.
And
like, I think one of the last ones I did, they had a real trumpeter, and I was like, yes, they have a real trumpeter playing taps. And I think Pastor said one of the last ones he did as well.
Yeah,
a real trumpeter and not tap.
And with AI coming up now too, it's increasingly making it easy for people to like, why spend thousands of dollars hiring a band or an orchestra to write a soundtrack when you can just prompt AI and you can have background stuff that's just as good in the eyes of most people. And that's partly too why I wanted to do this digital devotional. So maybe we could talk about that for a minute. I used to make different kinds of music videos with sort of different messages in them, and it occurred to me like it'd be really cool to do a digital devotional for Immanuel. Where like once a week we have some imagery inside of our own church, but it's like actual music written by an actual human, and the music is really just there to serve and lift up
the message.
The scripture and the message. So like. The theme has been living in God's grace, and so right now it's like a 12-part series of just like, first one was grace and creation, the second one was grace and salvation, and we'll just go through this theme of like evidence of God's grace in the Bible, what that means for us, and then again just this little devotional piece where like hopefully it can be a little bright spot in your week. But again, it's a part of it is like this answer to like the AI revolution, right? It's like this is a real human like really spending time doing this. And in a purposeful way to try and connect us to God's word.
That's the thing is like using these as a tool. Like I think, last year or so with you coming on board with like Instagram's been a lot more improved. And like the one I've always kind of wondered about, and I don't know like really if I'd want to start one for the church, like a Snapchat, how to use that. Like, I mean, I have my personal Snapchat I do have youth on there.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do I use like Snapchat?
Yeah.
And I'm like, do I really want to go down that path? Like,
we've talked a little bit about this, but there's this like age stratification happening by app.
Right.
So it's like, Gen X and Boomer generation is more Facebook.
And I would even say millennial.
Because like that was our first social media was MySpace
or Zanga.
Rest in peace, MySpace and Zanga.
Your top 8.
Pure volume. But yeah, so millennials kind of straddle the bridge between like Facebook and Instagram because Instagram is now mostly dominant by millennials, but as millennials, like we're aging now. I'm almost 40, and so like we are the people now with families, young families in church, and so that's been one of the reasons strategically I've wanted to emphasize Instagram is like having a window into our world, into our church. for millennials, I think is partly key to people seeing and becoming a part of bringing their family to Immanuel, you know?
Right. And like Twitter, I think that's kind of like,
it's kind of a mixed bag, I feel like.
Yeah, because like, I mean, I didn't have until my sermon at my first church for some of the kids like, Pastor, you need to get on Twitter. We're sick of tagging you Twitterless Donald.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, fine. I was like, I love Twitter, but I'm like, I never post on there. I'm like, I just like it for following like sports news or seeing highlights maybe in different sports.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really all I use it for. Yeah. It's not really connecting because I don't think I ever really see friends of mine that have Twitter posting. It's more just like official accounts of like this sports writer.
Yeah, it becomes like an adjacent thing to like their other main thing.
Right.
And it's so text driven, you know, but like in terms of the video consuming ones and like the sort of content mills, like, you know, the next ones are like you're saying, Snapchat and TikTok are where the youngest generations are. And I think there's some utility there, especially if we start a youth group, like it might be something worth pushing into. And what happens at a lot of, well, not just churches, but anyone who's making content for online, if you're across multiple platforms, the goal is like you try and shoot content for one thing, and then it gets cut in different ways to be applied to the different platforms, right? So like on TikTok, like you're never posting anything that's more than like a minute long, and all of your cuts need to be a few seconds because that's how young kids consume stuff.
Right,
it's fast.
Attention span.
And so, but like with Instagram, you can have a couple of minutes. Like people will actually watch 4 or 5 minute videos on Instagram if it's compelling to them. But again, it's our generation who we grew up when YouTube came online, and like, you know, you'd watch a 2-hour YouTube video just because it was cool, you know?
Or you watch highlights of something like, like watching highlights of Michael Jordan or something. Like, oh man, that was fun.
Yeah, yeah.
But even with like Instagram, you know, I found myself kind of spiraling on there where it's like, okay, I just go to like the For You page or whatever they call it, and you start scrolling the reels and just, nope. The next one.
That's what's weird too, is how the different platforms influence each other. Is like that was a very specifically TikTok thing,
right? And
then TikTok got so big, Instagram was like, we got to compete with this. And then so like what's weird for me is when I first started making videos on Instagram, they were only 1 minute was the length, and that was an improvement because it used to be like 30 seconds or something. For the longest time, it was images only, if you remember, right? And then when they introduced video, that was a big deal. But the format keeps changing, and so your approach has to keep changing. And again, that's part of the challenge with this whole tech world now is like, you don't want to compromise the mission and the message of the church, but you also want to adapt it well enough to how people are consuming so you can reach people and be on mission. You know, it's this weird double-edged sword.
Right, because you're talking about the Instagram 1 minute, because like I remember this was prior to COVID, I started doing little video devotions on Instagram. But
cool.
It could only be a minute.
Yeah, like I got to finish my thought now.
And then I'll admit I kind of got burnt out from doing that, and like it's coming up now a lot. But like during COVID, I would do a devotion every day on video devotion, put it up, and like, you know, I'm just looking at the one I posted 5 years ago today. It was almost a 4-minute video that I put on my Facebook, and I don't know how I did on Instagram, maybe something, but it was one of those, I'm like, because somebody asked, and I was like, okay, you know, I'll try to do this Monday through Friday. And it became kind of hard, like 4 days a week, 5 days a week, making a few minute video devotion. And like I kept up for a while, and then I think I kind of got burnt out on that everyday aspect of it.
Yes, yeah. And so that's why I've too, like I've had some experience with social media in the past, and like I've tried to, for the, you know, on Immanuel's behalf, running Instagram and some of our social media, try to be a regular presence, like posting like 4 or 5 times a week. I aim for everydayness, but there's always 2 or 3 days a week, depending on the week, that we're not posting anything. And part of it is like, again, it's this method and mission thing, right? Like the method can't be elevated above the mission. And if the method is like, well, everybody posts 3 times a day, every day, so we must do it too. Well, then like, maybe if there's a way we could create thoughtful, engaging, you know, mission-related content like that, sure.
Right.
But in the absence of that ability, like it's important to me that the stuff that we put out there is actually genuine and authentic and not just trying to peddle you something. We're not trying to sell you on Christ.
No.
You know what I mean? We're trying to introduce you to Christ, but that's a different thing, you know? And so, yeah, that's interesting for me as I navigate this is like, again, the digital devotionals, the tiny table talks, ask the pastors, like all of that stuff is an effort to, 1, be a window inside the church, but 2, be a window inside of Scripture and into Christ, and hopefully get some people acquainted with.
Right.
You know?
And that's the goal, is helping people in their journey of faith. Like I said, going back to the podcast, just another avenue where people can kind of hear Pastor and myself speaking into faith topics.
Yes.
However you want to listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
And whatever. And it's just, that's where people are at now.
And outside of the format of just a sermon, right? Because like a sermon is a great thing, but it's designed for a specific purpose inside of worship. And like a conversation that free flows also serves spiritual needs, but in a different aspect of it. And so, yeah, it offers, I think, a more roundness and a fuller kind of spiritual, the fuller spiritual picture by being able to have all those things, you know?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a good spot here. And so thank you, Joe, for hopping on today. And
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Pastor. And, so, sorry, not as good as Pastor Warren, but you guys, I'm sure we'll catch him in the next one.
Yeah, so God's blessings.
Take care.